This is the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast, presented by thehoosier.com. Hey, before we jump into this episode of the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast, make sure you are subscribed to the Hoosier on 3 on YouTube for all the IU content you could need, including press conferences, highlights, recruiting updates, the Hoosier tailgate, and of course, the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast. Also, go follow Talkin Bout The Hoosiers on Spotify. We really appreciate it and hope you enjoy this episode of the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast.
Hey, what's going on, Hoosier Nation? Hey, real quickly before we get started here with this video, make sure you go over to thehoosier.com and join for just $1 in your first week. With that, you get a free year subscription to theathletic.com, where you can also check out all of their content as well. Come over to thehoosier.com, join the best IU community there is out there. We'd love to.
Hello, Hoosier Nation, and welcome back to the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors. I'm joined by Zach Browning and Kyler Staley. I'm Drew Rosenberg. Big show today. Indiana Hoosiers football and basketball, undefeated right now in the early part of the season for basketball. Hoosiers coming off a big win over Kansas State last night. Zach, Kyler, you were both there. I'm just going to throw it to you, Zach. What was your overall impressions of the Indiana last night?
Yeah, that was impressive. It was another impressive performance, and I think what stands out, Drew, is, the Incarnate Word performance, that was what it was. The Lindenwood performance, that was what it was. But when you take Indiana's sample size against power conference teams, yes, it's small, but against Marquette and against Kansas State, you've won by 23 points and you won by 17 points. That's getting it done. That's exactly what you're looking for if you're Darren DeVries to start this new era at Indiana. And last night against Kansas State, it wasn't the offense like it was against Marquette. It wasn't a 14-28 performance in three-point range like it was against Marquette. The three-point shots, they were falling. They hit a lot of them because they took a lot of them, but it was really the defense that stood out. And the defense is where this team can really make its money this year. If they can be not even an elite defensive team, if they can be sound defensively, solid defensively, like they were last night, they were really good last night defensively, the sky can really be the limit for this team because their offense is going to be there more often than not, but the defense really can elevate the squad.
Yeah, I was surprised. I looked at KenPom this morning. 15th best defense in the country right now. Obviously, small sample size, just 6 games, but that's very telling when you see what the offense has been through the early part of the season. The offense 38th, but those are the plays. That's where you want to be. Truthfully, that's national championship. That's like where that bubble is when they always look at the KenPom, like where the national champion comes from in KenPom towards the end of the season. So it's a great sign for Indiana in the early part of the season.
What are they, number 20 right now? I think there's only 4 Big Ten teams, like Purdue, Michigan, Illinois, and Michigan State, I think, is in that. So it's definitely kind of a weird sight to see because I feel like it's just been an uphill battle with the KenPom ratings, the past 3-4 years, you know what I mean? So, but no, I think last night, and, we went pretty in-depth in our post-game show and stuff, so sorry if I'm repeating a lot of this stuff, but I think last night, I think there's many takeaways you can take about it. One of the big things with me, and Zach kind of mentioned it a little bit, the Incarnate Word game, the Lindenwood game and stuff, obviously those were 2 back-to-back kind of questionable performances from Indiana. It's really sluggish, considering they were playing so well early on in the season. Look at that Marquette game. They couldn't do anything wrong, basically, in that. And then it just showed to me that, this team is not satisfied, just to have a W next to them. They want to get better. They want to improve. And I would suspect that, the past week, practice-wise, it was a lot of, going at each other and, a lot of things were tinkered with and things like that. DeVries is obviously going to do the right things to get these guys ready, and they responded very well last night. As we start on, the first 10 minutes of the game, they were unstoppable. Defense was leading the offense, and I mentioned it last night in the postgame show. It's like, what Indiana's best offense is, when their defense is clicking and they can get live ball turnovers, they can get stops, get out in transition, and then they can just score on that broken floor that Coach DeVries wants to do. So, it's a really good win. I think in the long term, I think Kansas State's going to probably be, if I had to guess, a middle of the pack Big 12 team. So they're obviously going to be fighting for an NCAA tournament berth. And just the fact that, Kansas State, I think what they were averaging 85 points a game, somewhere around there.
93.
And for Indiana to hold them to what they held them to, just phenomenal defensive wise. So I think it's just all about consistency with Indiana. Obviously the foul trouble is still a little concerning and stuff, obviously with Indiana's lack of depth that they have. So fouls can be really, really dangerous for this team. But if they can just learn to defend without fouling, while continue to be intense on that end, I think you're going to see a more complete team. There's still a lot to work on with this team. It is just, it's about to be December 1st, on Monday. So there's still time for them to work on things. They've got big opponents coming up, but I really like what I saw with this Indiana team, and they'll just continue to show what potentially they could become, especially when you get into Big Ten play.
Yeah, I think the fouling, I think it's something that's going to be with this team all year long. It's no secret, the lack of, a true center, that's going to be able to bang with the top, the biggest guys in the country, especially when you're going against, Purdue, Illinois, those type of teams. So Indiana has to play physical, at the wings, they have length, they have size there. And we saw it yesterday, a lot of tip passes, forcing turnovers. I think Kansas State 19 turnovers, which is a huge difference for Indiana, 27 points off those turnovers. But Indiana's going to play aggressive on defense, and it's going to lead to fouls. They're going to play physical. And I think when we get in the Big Ten season and the officiating, they let them play a little bit more, as we've seen in the past with Big Ten officiating, it's going to be a big advantage for Indiana.
And something that stands out about last night is that Indiana, yes, they fouled a lot. Three guys with 4 fouls, but they still shot 14 more free throws than Kansas State. So I think you can really kind of flip the script. If you're going to get in foul trouble yourself and you can also put the other team in foul trouble, I think it kind of balances out kind of what shortcomings you might have from a depth perspective when you have to rotate guys in. But Reed Bailey alone shot as many free throws as Kansas State last night, which is kind of crazy.
We got to talk about that, too. I was going to throw that in. Reed Bailey, pretty much shot most of the free throws all night.
Yeah, his best game as a Hoosier, I think, by far. We were all – it was a critical of his first half. It was rough. Let's call it how it is. Yeah. For as bad as he was in the first half, he was equally as good in the second half. It was one of the biggest turnarounds I've seen from a player that isn't, I guess, the bona fide star of a team, and Indiana needed it last night.
Yeah, there was a lot of question marks with Reed Bailey. He's had decent games. I think early on in the season, he's had decent games against that low major competition stuff. But this was definitely kind of a wake up call for him. And I think Coach DeVries challenged him. I think it was early on, maybe towards the end of the first half, early second half or whatever, challenged him. And, said, hey, man, you got to be a lot more aggressive. Well, we really need you. Sam Alexis is obviously in foul trouble. And he responded very, very well. And hopefully moving forward, this is a type of confidence that he can kind of build off of and realize, he was at Davidson. It's definitely a different play than what Indiana is going to go up against the Big Ten play. So I think this was kind of a learning moment for him. Hey, I really need to step up here and stuff. A lot of people have been questioning, what does he bring to the team or whatever and stuff. He did end up with 4 rebounds. You want to see those numbers be a little bit up. I'd like to see it kind of in the 6-7 range, for him. But just a really good showing by him. So, you guys doing 6-7?
No, I hate that. Zach, as soon as you said it, I looked at Zach. I just saw him.
Dang, that shows how old I am. But anyway, Reed Bailey, yeah, just really spectacular from him. I was really impressed by the way that he played last night, and hopefully he can continue that moving forward.
I think what stands out, too, about Reed Bailey is last night wasn't even the full kind of throttle what he can be for this Indiana team. Oh, excuse me, my camera there for a second. But that wasn't even full throttle what Reed Bailey can be for this Indiana team, because what he is he's one of the biggest benefactors of Lamar Wilkerson and of Tucker DeVries and of their gravity, because there was a couple of times last night where Kansas State, where DeVries would come around a dribble handoff or Wilkerson would be set up for a dribble handoff with Reed Bailey, and Bailey would have his defender and the guy chasing Wilkerson or DeVries kind of jump out to those shooters. And then he had an open lane to drive to the basket, or he had an open lane to pass it to somebody that was cutting to the basket. I think he's one of the biggest benefactors of the gravity that Wilkerson and DeVries present. And I think last night wasn't even the full-fledged what you kind of want and what you kind of expect out of Reed Bailey, because he's somebody that can operate in the high post. He's a guy that you can cut around. He's a guy that can operate in that dribble handoff game with Lamar Wilkerson, with Tucker DeVries. And if he's going to play as aggressive as he did last night consistently, it will put defenses into a little bit of a bind, because when he's set up there, let's say at the wing, just below that three-point line, if he's set up there and he's going into a dribble handoff action with Wilkerson or DeVries, what do you do in that situation defensively? If you're chasing Tucker DeVries, he's going to get that shot off unless that defender guarding Reed Bailey steps up and tries to cut him off. So if that defender does that and Reed Bailey is going to be aggressive, that's an open lane to drive to the basket where Reed Bailey is a good enough ball handler and a good enough decision maker to where he can operate in that kind of situation and either score for himself or create for others. So I think last night, the 15 free throws, I'm not sure we'll see him shoot that many free throws again in a game this season, but I think you can kind of see the flashes of what Reed Bailey can be with the ball in his hand, being a decision maker for this Indiana team, like not a primary ball handler. Obviously, that's Tatum Conaway or Conor Enright, but kind of like that secondary or even tertiary, just decision maker where he can have the ball in the high post in the middle of the floor and make the right play consistently in those situations.
Yeah, and we saw him slipping a lot of screens too, which he got to the rim quite a bit and was drawing fouls. It's something we've seen Sam Alexis do all season long. Sam Alexis it was foul trouble yesterday, so we didn't really see him too much. But that's where he's kind of made his hit most of his buckets this year. It's been as a screener off a quick roll or second chances. And Reed Bailey, there was a couple plays he was keeping offensive boards alive. He didn't get credit for the offensive rebounds, but he was keeping possessions alive. And I loved what I saw from Indiana as a team, though, rebounding the basketball. I think it was 6 different guys with 4 rebounds yesterday. When you're a smaller team, you have to rebound 5 guys to the basketball, and Indiana did that yesterday, and that's why they won the battle of the on the boards. And if Indiana can just be competitive on the boards, they're gonna have great chances throughout the season, especially when they are playing bigger teams.
I think what impressed me the most, I think the most impressive stat for me was I think Kansas State was leading like 18-15 at halftime last night, and then Indiana only held them to only 10 rebounds in the second half. And then Indiana won at 35 to 18 or 28 like that. So I mean, just the fact that they were showing effort, and you mentioned it was like Reed Bailey, he's not getting credited for the offensive rebounds, but at the end of the day, rebounding, if you're just competing down low and you're trying to make plays happen and you're just fighting good things happen like that, and that's not what we've seen from this Indiana team. I mean, Incarnate Ward, Lindenwood, those guys, were rebounding easily against Indiana, and a guy that was part of the leading along with Tucker DeVries rebounding wise was Conor Enright, and he's the smallest player on the floor. So that just goes to show you they need guys that just step in and fight for boards, crash the glass a little bit. Yeah, you can get Tatum Conaway, you can get Lamar Wilkerson out there at the half court waiting for that outlet pass, you know what I mean? But if you just have guys that are just fighting for rebounds, other than Sam Alexis, you can get a Tucker DeVries. Trent Sisley's done fantastic off the bench, fighting for rebounds and trying to make extra plays happen for Indiana. But if you can get Reed Bailey to be consistent, fighting for boards and just being aggressive consistently, this Indiana team can really turn a corner when it comes to rebounding. Yeah, they're not going to be the biggest team hardly ever on the floor, but at the end of the day, rebounding, especially defensive rebounding, it's effort. It's a willingness to get in there and crash the glass. And I was just really impressed with what I saw from Indiana, because they could have easily let Kansas State control the game when it comes to rebounding, but they didn't.
Yeah, how about Trent Sisley, too? 3 offensive rebounds for him yesterday. He really made his presence felt on the boards. Off the bench as a scorer, too. I mean, we know what he can bring in transition. But as an offensive rebounder, I mean, there was 3 big offensive rebounds, and stealing possessions like that when Indiana, is going to be small or undersized for most of the games this year. It's a weapon to have a guy like Trent Sisley who's willing to get his nose dirty.
He was one of the most impactful players on the floor last night for Indiana, but I'd feel remiss. We're about 13 and a half minutes into this podcast, and we haven't truly discussed Conor Enright's defensive impact so far this game, and he was fantastic. He might have been, despite scoring 7 points, and despite being the 6th leading scorer on IU last night, he might have been the single most impactful player on the floor just with his energy and his defensive effort against not just anybody, the country's leading scorer entering the game. PJ Haggerty was averaging 28 points per game. He was held to 16 points on 7 of 17 shooting. He didn't hit a 3. He turned it over 6 times. He committed 4 fouls. A lot of those fouls, frustration fouls, because of what Enright was able to do. And it started early from the jump, and I think that was key. DeVries had talked about against Incarnate Word and against Lindenwood the need to kind of sustain the energy and enthusiasm and not really just be the first 4 minutes really high and then start to drop off a little bit after that. And I think it was important for Enright, that first defensive possession, the first offensive possession for Kansas State. He got the steal. Lamar Wilkerson stepped into a 3. And that's really where the party got started for Indiana. That's really where the tone was set. It started on the first defensive possession. It started with Conor Enright. And again, he scored just 7 points, but I'm not sure there was any player that was more impactful on the result of that game than Enright last night.
No, I mean, like, what you saw last night is exactly what he's going to bring for this Indiana team. Yeah, I know it can kind of be frustrating because if you're an Indiana fan, you obviously want guys that can score the ball. All 5 guys on the floor. You want guys that can score the ball. And yeah, he only ended up with 7 points, but 2 from 5 from 3. You take that any day out of him. It's just the impact defensively that he brings. And we've known that, coming into the season, it was going to be him and Tank Conaway, kind of leading that charge on the defensive end because they're not, obviously Indiana's not a good rim protecting team, and they needed guys to step up, at the wing, at the perimeter, on the ball to really stop that from guys penetrating, getting into the lane. But Conor Enright, for him to go up against, literally the best scorer in the nation right now in PJ Haggerty. Obviously you hold him to 16 points, that's low for him. But like you mentioned, all the other stats, the turnovers and things like that, is huge for Conor Enright. That is why Coach DeVries loves him so much. Is just the competitive edge that he brings on the floor. And obviously he's going to play with intensity. He's going to play with a high motor every single time when he's in the game. So obviously when he moving forward and everything, you're going to see a lot more out of Conor Enright with that. This is definitely a game that I felt like Indiana fans finally okay, I think we kind of understand what Conor Enright's role is with this team. And he's just going to be a fan favorite moving forward. I mean, there's no question about that.
Yeah, and his energy, it's contagious. I mean, you see it translates to the rest of the guys when he is, getting up in PJ Haggerty's grill and, pressuring him 94 feet away from the basket. It's contagious. We see Tatum Conaway, another guy, hustle guy, who's diving for loose balls. When this team is doing that and they're hustling and they're competing at the level we saw yesterday, they're going to be tough to beat. It doesn't matter if the 3-point shot is falling or not. When you compete like that, you're going to be in a lot of basketball games. And then when the 3-point shot is falling, they're going to be really tough to beat, as we've seen already this season.
And that's what stands out to me. They scored 86 points. Yeah, they made 10 threes, but that's only 30 points from 3-point range. But they still scored 86 points without their leading scorer, Tucker DeVries, reaching double figures. He had 9. The offensive performance, the creating points off of the defense, that was really telling because it was after the Incarnate Word and the Lindenwood games. There was the discussion, this is what Indiana's going to look like when the 3-point shot isn't falling. It's going to look rough. It's not going to be pretty when the 3-point shot isn't falling. And let's face it, the 3-point shot, it's not going to be there every night for Indiana, no matter the competition, whether there's going to be some nights where they struggle from 3. But it's about how do you find ways to score? How do you find ways to compete when that 3-point shot isn't falling? And against Incarnate Word and against Lindenwood, there really were no answers. There was, if the 3-point shot's not falling, they're going to struggle. They're not going to be a good team when that 3-point shot isn't going to fall for them. But last night against Kansas State, there was the sign. There was this is kind of the way Indiana can kind of counteract the 3-point inefficiency. Again, not that they were bad. They made 10 threes. It took them 33 attempts to get there, but they still made 10 threes, which is good. I think Darren DeVries will take that more often than not. But when it's not falling at a super efficient clip, Indiana still found a way to score 86 points, and it wasn't because of the defense. And I think that's something, perhaps more so than anything, that Indiana can take moving forward from this game.
Yeah, the offensive approach last night, in the second half especially, in the first half we saw them, I think Indiana had 31 shot attempts, 22 were threes. And it was especially from the start, we saw Tucker DeVries, Lamar Wilkerson, a couple of deep threes early in the shot clock where it was you settled, probably could have got something better. And then in the second half, the focus on getting to the rim and getting taking the threes after the ball touches the paint. Anyone who plays basketball or has played basketball at any level or watches basketball knows the best 3-point shots are the ones that come after the ball touches the paint. And Indiana made a focus on that in the second half. I don't think the percentages was much better in the second half, but the looks were a lot better. They were drawing fouls, getting to the rim. And when the threes aren't falling, when you're able to do that, get to the rim, get to the free throw line, as we saw, especially Reed Bailey, it solves a lot of those issues.
I mean, I think it just shows, overall, it shows to me that this team can win even if Tucker DeVries and Lamar Wilkerson aren't having a great night. Now, Lamar Wilkerson finished with 14 points. That's good. Don't get me wrong, but that's obviously not going to be one of his better performances that we're going to see this season. And Tucker DeVries obviously was struggling really hard. I think they got the lead up to 17-19 before Tucker DeVries had even scored a basket last night. It just shows to me that they can find ways and they can have guys step up. Reed Bailey obviously stepped up. Tate Conaway stepped up. He did have 7 turnovers, so you want to kind of watch out for that moving forward. But, those guys, those senior leaders, those experienced guys stepped up when Indiana needed to. And I think Reed Bailey mentioned something about that as well in the postgame presser. hey, like, it's good to see that maybe Tucker DeVries has a little bit more trust in us. Like if he's having an off night, he trusts his teammates to go out there and perform and, pick up the slack a little bit. So this team overall is just really fascinating to watch in real time because we're learning so much about them. You thought that, the 3 ball was going to be their death sentence if it's not hitting and not, but no, they can actually compete on the defensive end. They can make plays. Tank Conaway can get down the hill and get to the basket, with the best stuff. And Reed Bailey, if he's locked in and ready to go, he can be a force with that. And then you've got a guy like Trent Sisley, Sam Alexis coming off the bench that provides so much production for this team that I think once you get into like January ball with these guys and they've had a lot more games put under them, I think they're going to be a real complete team and they're going to be a really tough team that you just don't want to face. I'm not saying that they're going to compete for a Big Ten championship or anything, but they are really putting together really good performances. And it's just really impressive and just fun to watch.
But when the 3 is falling too, they're capable of throwing some big haymakers. I mean, we saw it the first 5-6 minutes of the game. They were up 20-4, and it was like, oh, how did this happen so quickly? 4 threes. Like Indiana's not they're going to stay in a lot of games because of that ability to just turn it on real quick and knock down 3 after 3 to where they can turn a 10-point deficit into a 5-point lead just like that. And yesterday Indiana opened the game like that. They threw that first punch, and Kansas State punched back. But it was hard to recover from a 16-point deficit 5 minutes into the game.
Well, and Indiana never trailed, and I think that's kind of important. They led by double figures in both halves for long periods and long stretches of time. And when you can get out to that start, and Kirsten Eddy talks about this on the football side, you can really kind of break the will of your opponent, and maybe not so in the first half because Kansas State did come back, but perhaps that run to close the first half was really where Indiana began to break Kansas State's will. You could see it a little bit coming out in the second half. There was some points where PJ Haggerty in that second half kind of started to get it going a little bit, and then you had that one moment where Haggerty scored like four points or 6 or 8 points for Kansas State, and Tatum Conaway came down on the other end and immediately got an and one, and that was kind of the nail in the coffin. That kind of did it. So I think it just goes to show that as opposed to the Lindenwood games, as opposed to the Incarnate Word games, the energy was up from start to finish. There were some lulls here and there, some lulls in the offense specifically, but for the most part, for the better part of 35-plus minutes in that game Tuesday night, the energy, the competitiveness, the enthusiasm, all the things that Darren DeVries was talking about after the Lindenwood game that were kind of lacking a little bit, and Tucker DeVries added that they were kind of lacking as well, those weren't lacking for the better part of that win over Kansas State for pretty much the entire game.
I'll ask you guys both this. What's the main thing you want to see Indiana continue to improve on, moving forward?
For me, I think it's rebounding. I really liked what I saw in the second half from Kansas State, but I want to see a full 40 minutes of that. I want 5 guys collapsing the glass, boxing out, and just fighting like they did because, it's easy to do it in spurts. Doing it for a full 40 minutes, that's tough, and Indiana needs to be able to do that if they're going to be a decent rebounding team.
I'll probably say defense without fouling. Conor Enright had 4 fouls. He was forced to kind of exit the game late in that. The game was pretty much already out of reach. But when you've got guys like Lamar Wilkerson in foul trouble, you need him on the floor. He's a bulk of your offense. When you've got a guy like Conor Enright in foul trouble like he was against Kansas State, you need him on the floor. He's guarding PJ Haggerty, the opposing team's best player. So being able to play defense without fouling is key to being a good defensive team. Indiana, sure, last night was good, but just imagine how much better those numbers and the defense could have looked if they would have not allowed 15 free throws and fouled 20 times and allowed second chance opportunities with the rebounding, like Drew said. So I think defense without fouling is probably the biggest point of emphasis for me moving forward.
I would say both those are probably the 2 main things. My thing I was just going to say real quick was just having consistent energy. There's a lot of times this Indiana team will kind of pull back a little bit, and I kind of use the analogy play with their food a little bit, and I felt like they were doing that a little bit last night and allowing Kansas State to kind of get back into it when they really didn't need to let that happen. If they just would have continued with the intensity and the energy that we saw out of the first 10 minutes of the game. But when this team can finally put together a full 40-minute performance, I mean, watch out because there's you mentioned haymakers, Drew. That's a perfect analogy with this team because they can really just shut down a team if the 3 balls falling, if they're really intense on defense, defending without fouling, and they're competing for rebounds on both ends of the floor. I mean, they could be a really, really dangerous team.
Yeah, I'm also curious to see this is more moving forward. How do they play on the road? Because we've saw that neutral site game against Marquette, but there was a lot of Indiana fans
That
in
was
the
about
crowd.
70-30 Indiana fans.
Yeah, so you go to Minnesota, looking at Minnesota 105th in KenPom, so a game Indiana should win.
Yeah.
But on the road, and we all know winning on the road in the Big Ten isn't easy. And I like how that's their first true road game of the season, though, especially when you have a trip to Kentucky 10 days after that. So it's kind of they get a little taste of it before really going into the one of the hardest places any of them will play maybe in their entire basketball careers.
Yeah, and there's going to be a neutral site game. I know it's in Indianapolis, but I mean Louisville, like they travel very well. I mean it's definitely going to be a 50-50 split between Louisville and Indiana fans too. So that's not going to be easy at all. And Louisville is playing like one of the best teams in the country right now. So that's going to be a real test for Indiana. I'm not saying that they have to win that game or whatever, but man, if they can keep it competitive and keep it close with them, I think they're going to really build off of that and stuff. And looking at Kentucky, yeah, they've had some injury problems and stuff, but I mean, it's Rupp Arena. That's a hard place to play at and stuff. So Minnesota, you mentioned a team that they should beat, but like it's on the road. You just don't know. Is the three ball going to travel with them? Are their shots going to travel with them? Is the defense going to travel with them? You just don't know yet. So that's the fun. That's the fun part about this Indiana team is just learning them by game basis and seeing what this team can bring.
Yeah, on In Touch, I said going into the Kansas State game, I wanted to see Indiana go into the new year 6-2 at worst, and that includes the games against Louisville, Kentucky, Penn State, Minnesota, and then you have Bethune-Cookman, Siena, and Chicago State. If they go 6-2, you're saying, you know what, this is about what we expected from this team. If they can take one of those Louisville or Kentucky games and you're 7-1, now you're looking at this team as maybe they are a lot better than we previously thought going into that. I think they have a 13-day break between that Siena game and then restarting Big Ten play with Washington.
Yeah, we're going to learn a lot about this Indiana team during that stretch because not only the road game against Minnesota, figuring out how to play Big Ten games. I mean, those games are likely going to be bogged down. It's Minnesota, it's Penn State. Those are two teams that are probably, you figure, going to finish near the bottom of the Big Ten. It's probably not going to be pretty. How does Indiana react in a game that isn't pretty? So far, the two wins against power conference teams, they've been not dominant, but pretty much as close to dominant as you can get. The Marquette game probably more so than the Kansas State game. So it'll be interesting to see how Indiana reacts to a power conference opponent when it isn't smooth sailing for 40 minutes.
And hopefully by mid-December, I think there's been talk about that. Hopefully you get one of like Jason Drake or Alexa Ristich, back and stuff to provide a little bit more depth. So, but yeah, I mean, honestly, and then obviously Josh Harris, who knows when he's going to return, but man, if they can get him back just to play some spot minutes in the front court, and then maybe you can even play a lineup of Reed Bailey and Sam Alexis, like that would be really, really good for Indiana. But, Indiana's trending in really good direction right now. They just got to be competitive with Kentucky and Louisville, and we'll just kind of see what this Indiana team's about.
Yeah, and throw Nick Dorn in there. Who's trying to make get his feet wet and get back. He's coming back from injury. He's gonna be a part of that rotation. We see it already. I'll just let Zach talk about Nick Dorn because that's your guy. But he is someone. The more he gets comfortable, the better this team will be off the bench too.
Yeah, and there was a moment last night with Tucker DeVries in foul trouble where Darren DeVries was going offense-defense with Tucker and with Nick Dorn, and I think the thing with Dorn is obviously the three-point shot hasn't necessarily started falling yet, but you can see the willingness to take it. He's almost got as green of a light as Lamar Wilkerson and Tucker DeVries do, which in this type of offense, you need that. And he's also just a big body. He's been better than I was anticipating and probably better than advertised on the glass, at least maybe not grabbing rebounds, but at least attacking the glass and being there on the offensive glass. Him and Josiah Miles both. I can tell that's been a focal point for them individually, trying to be better on the glass, specifically on the offensive glass, and trying to create extra possessions for this team.
I'm excited to see what Nick Dorn can do, honestly. I mean, I love his jumper. Once he can get that a little bit more consistent, you mentioned it. If he could just be a guy that just mixes it up down low and stuff and uses his body, because he's got a really, really strong body frame. If he could just use that and just muck things up down there, he could be a really, really dangerous threat for Indiana. But he played a lot more minutes last night. I continue to expect that he's going to continue to build on his minutes a little bit. And I think a breakout game is probably going to come sooner rather than later.
Yeah, his length too. That was something that really stuck out to me last night. A couple deflections just on the defensive end. We talk about how Indiana's undersized at the 5, but it to 1, 2, 3, 4 because they have length and they're able to make it tough getting into the perimeter. Nick Dorn is a big part of that moving forward.
Absolutely. I'm excited. December's going to really tell a lot about this Indiana team.
Yeah, it's a good time to be an Indiana fan, football and basketball. We're going to get to some football talk in just a sec, but we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors, and then we'll be back to talk Indiana football, Heisman Mendoza, and the Old Oaken Bucket game. Hey, Hoosier fans, it's Drew from the Hoosier and the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast. I just came from my local Academy Sports and Outdoors store. The most festive gear of the year is back at Academy Sports and Outdoors. Don't miss a limited edition Magellan Outdoor Christmas Market collection only at Academy. Get exclusive 2025 gear and gifts for all your holiday parties, fun family photos, and Christmas morning traditions. Check out the entire collection from matching PJs and holiday print fishing shirts and dresses to exclusive new Mossy Oak Snowdrift camo styles and more. Shop in-store or at academy.com. Need it fast? Get same-day delivery powered by DoorDash. Let your holiday fun begin with the Magellan Outdoors Christmas Market collection, only at Academy. As you all probably know by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use the bonus code ON3, and you'll get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code ON3. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You'll receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. Just make sure you use the bonus code ON3 when you sign up. Make this college football season one for the history books. Make it legendary. We'll be right back, but first we have to talk to you guys about Rhoback Activewear. There's only one way to describe Rhoback. Best fit, best feel. For those who aren't familiar with Rhoback, they're completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable activewear. Rhoback has released so many items within their new licensed game day collection, and it's our favorite. With novel polo designs and clean hoodie and Q-zip designs from some of your favorite schools, including the Indiana Hoosiers, it's definitely worth checking out. Nobody else in the market is pairing these level of custom designs with this quality of activewear. Rhoback's everyday shorts or their Delta Performance pants are the perfect pairing as well. They're both super comfortable, have an elastic waistband, and great fabric that is made to have the appearance of a nice short look, but the comfort for a day on the move. Rhoback has also been proudly leading the NIL charge, having signed partnerships with multiple college football stars, past and present, and are becoming the go-to brand for college athletes across the country. Use the code IND20 on Rhoback.com for a generous 20% off for all new customers throughout the end of the week. That's spelled RHOBACK.com. That's 20% off all performance polos, shorts, and more with the code IND20. Now back to the rest of this episode of the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast. All right, Zach, it's time to jump into some Indiana football talk. Our favorite subject, the 11-0 Hoosiers looking for the first 12-0 season in program history. All that stands in the way, Old Oaken Bucket game, Purdue. We're going to get into that in a second. We got to start with, we're the only place we can't start, Heisman Mendoza. It's a new it was Julian Sayin and Fernando Mendoza, now Jeremiah Love making his way into it. Zach, what is your kind of impressions right now of the Heisman race?
It's weird because this still feels like it's just a lot of talk. I mean, Jeremiah Love's, and I still feel like it's a lot of jibber jabber because I still feel like I have the last 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and it's going to come down to conference championship weekend. And now Fernando Mendoza does probably have a little bit of an advantage there because if you look at the other guys in that kind of upper echelon of odds with him, it's Mendoza, who, assuming IU beats Purdue this weekend, will be playing in the conference championship. It's Jeremiah Love, who doesn't have a conference championship to play in because of Notre Dame. It's Diego Pavia, who Vanderbilt's not going to be playing in a conference championship. And then it's Julian Sayin kind of down there as well. Those are really the top four that I've seen, the consensus top four. Now, whether Pavia could realistically win it or not, I don't know. Whether they'd actually give it to a running back this year after not giving it to Ashton Genty last year, that'd kind of be very hypocritical of the selection process, considering that Genty was probably more deserving of it than Jeremiah Love is this year, respectively. So it's all up in the air. I think the fact that Jeremiah Love has made this late season push is more so based on the fact that none of these quarterbacks, whether it's Mendoza, whether it's Sayin, are having like truly generational Heisman-like seasons. Yes, Fernando Mendoza has been really good, but you're looking at Heisman finalists, typically they're 3,500 yards, 45, 50 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and that's just not the numbers that anybody at the quarterback position is putting up this year. So I think that's probably where you get this Jeremiah Love late season hype from. But to me, if you weren't going to give it to Ashton Genty last year, you can't give it to Jeremiah Love this year. And again, Fernando Mendoza will have an opportunity, as I've said for the last 4 or 5 weeks, to go out and prove why he's the Heisman in a potential Big Ten championship game against Ohio State, assuming IU beats Purdue.
Yeah, and I think Fernando Mendoza, part of it's a problem, but it's a good problem. He sat out at the end of 6 games this year. He's had 6 different games where he's sat out more than a couple drives. A lot of them he's missed an entire fourth quarter, some even into the third quarter he was pulled. He's 35 total touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He's been very good. Those numbers would be a lot better if he was playing deep into the fourth quarter of a lot of these games. That's what hurt him. It's hard because Jeremiah Love has been special. And you mentioned Ashton Genty last year, and I wonder, is it going to be like, oh, maybe they're going to give it to Jeremiah Love is like we should have gave it to Genty type of thing last year. My biggest issue with Jeremiah Love and just Notre Dame in general is everyone's going to look at, he's had some huge games, Pitt last 2 weeks ago. I mean, last week we also have the numbers against Syracuse, 8 carries, 171 yards. Like, no one is like denying how good he's been. He's been the best running back in the nation. He's been unbelievable. I just have a hard time looking past that Miami game to start the year. 10 carries, 33 yards, and, a big spot for them in a loss. People look at Mendoza's, some of his numbers against Iowa, Oregon, Penn State, and yeah, the numbers on it's not the prettiest numbers either, but then you watch the games and you watch what he did all 3 games, fourth quarter drives to lead Indiana to win. He's had those moments without Fernando Mendoza, Indiana isn't, 11-0. Without Jeremiah Love, I don't know how much worse Notre Dame is. I mean, you look at Jadarian Price behind him, who's also excellent.
That's the thing. Jadarian Price has out-carried and out-touchdowned Jeremiah Love at points this season, and I think that's really the biggest thing. I feel like that Notre Dame offensive line, you could probably plug one of us in there, and we could carry for positive yards and get a first down or two. Not really, but that offensive line is one of the best, if not the best, in all of college football. And I think you brought up a good point there. If you're just watching the games, where is Jeremiah Love's fourth quarter touchdown pass to win the game against Iowa? Where is Jeremiah Love's fourth quarter, last play, less than 30 seconds to go on the road against Penn State? Where's that touchdown pass to Omar Cooper? He just doesn't have, and it's hard because he's a running back and he simply can't get that. And also the 2 games they've played against good teams, they've lost. They're not even good teams. LSU is not even good. But Notre Dame hasn't really been in the position to have a Heisman moment. And if you're a running back, you can't really have a Heisman moment. Sure, you can break off an 80-yard run against Pitt, but you beat that team by 30,000 touchdowns. I mean, that game wasn't close. That's not a Heisman moment. I mean, Kalen Black and Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton did that countless times against Indiana's opponents last year in games that weren't close. It's not something that sticks out as a Heisman moment like a last-second touchdown pass on the road against Penn State does, or going on the road, bouncing back from throwing a pick six and leading a game-winning drive against Oregon. It just doesn't have that same feel to it, which is why the odds makers, the odds, they are what there are. It's just I have a really hard time seeing Jeremiah Love get it over any quarterback realistically that's not any quarterback like Mendoza and Sain. I think it still probably comes down to those two, whoever wins that Big Ten championship. But I feel like Mendoza's at the point now where he could still have a poor game. He could still lose that game. Indiana could still lose, and he could have a good game and still beat Sain, even if Indiana loses to Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, Jeremiah Love last week against Syracuse, his first touch of the game came with Notre Dame leading 21-0. Like, he is unbelievable, and he elevates them so much, but at the same time, it's not like he is carrying them like we see Fernando Mendoza doing. Elijah Surratt has missed time. In the Indiana passing game, hasn't missed a beat. Most teams, if you take Jeremiah Smith, who in my opinion is the best player in the country, off Ohio State, what does their passing game look like? How different is it? And we saw that last week with Julian Sain struggling. Yes, they took down Rutgers dominantly, but it wasn't, what Julian Sain has been without his best receiver. Fernando Mendoza looked exactly the same. He turned, an unheralded sophomore, Charlie Becker, from no one knew who he was to national prominence after 2 huge performances from him, with Fernando Mendoza throwing strike after strike. And that's, I think, the difference. The supporting cast of Indiana, it's it's really funny to me because you see all season long everyone knocking the supporting cast saying they're not that good. And, Elijah Surratt is unbelievable. Omar Cooper is so talented, just getting the feet down there. But so when it comes time to knock Fernando and Mendoza in the Heisman, they're going to praise those guys. But all season long, they're actually not as good as Ohio State or these other programs when it's time to make them in the rankings. So which is it? Are these guys as good as they are, or are they not that good? It's the funniest thing, the narrative surrounding Indiana, just, how it changes to fit different narratives.
And again, I think, all this talk to come back and circle back to it, Mendoza is the current favorite. He is the current betting favorite, and I don't necessarily see that changing. He's going to have an opportunity here against Purdue. I'm not going to call it stat padding, but he's going to have an opportunity. If you look at what Curtis Rourke did last year against Purdue, Mendoza's going to have an opportunity to put up some numbers this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. It's, not a snow, or maybe not a snow game. I was hoping that we'd get another blizzard. It looks like just going to miss it. But this Purdue game, it's going to be one of those, I think we're going to see from Mendoza put up some numbers, but the Ohio State game is what should define it. I think the ballot shouldn't come out till after conference championship week because of that. I also was thinking they should either make it the Heisman at the very end of the year after the playoff or have a separate playoff MVP for the entire playoff, something like that. Because that should matter, like how in professional sports or even March Madness, we have a tournament MVP. We need a college football playoff MVP as well.
Yeah, I can see that. This being a regular season award, but then having conference championship weekend play such a big factor is just odd to me.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. And it's weird because it comes out early too. So, you're going to know who it is. I think it's 2 weeks from now. So like right after the conference championship is when the ceremony is, but Mendoza will have a good chance this week to I kind of stat battle a little bit, but let's just jump into this Purdue game, Old Oaken Bucket game. Indiana Hoosiers 28.5-point favorites. Purdue 2-9, 9 straight losses, and have not beat a power conference team. Zach, I'm gonna ask you point blank. Is there any way you see Purdue taking down Indiana and shocking the world?
No, but rivalry games are rivalry games, and yes, Purdue's lost 17 straight games in conference play. But the last time Purdue won a conference game was against Indiana at Ross-Ade Stadium in West Lafayette. It was 2 years ago. It was Tom Allen's last game as the head coach. So in rivalry games, anything can happen. I just think the gap between these two teams is so wide. It's the widest really it's ever been in the history of the Oaken Bucket. Even when Purdue was winning Big Ten championships as an 8-5 team and going to Big Ten championship games, I should say, as an 8-5 team, and Indiana was continually the losingest program in college football history. The gap between those teams was nowhere near as wide as it is now. Purdue is one of the worst teams in power conference. Indiana is the number 2 team in the country. And I think what is interesting about this game is, yes, it's the 100th Old Oaken Bucket game, but it doesn't have that big rivalry feel because Indiana's got so much more to play for after this game. This isn't necessarily a game for Indiana where, let's flash forward to Friday night, Drew. Indiana beats Purdue. Let's just say hypothetically, Indiana beats Purdue. The biggest headline isn't Indiana captures Old Oaken Bucket for second straight year. The biggest headline is Indiana clinches spot in Big Ten championship game for the first time ever. Indiana has their first perfect regular season since 1945. Those are the bigger headlines rather than the Old Oaken Bucket, which I think is really telling about how far apart these two programs are right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Even if Indiana, let's say, catastrophic loss happens, if Ohio State wins against Michigan, nothing changes. Indiana will drop in the rankings, but Indiana will still be playing in the Big Ten championship against Ohio State for a chance. And, if they win that game, they'll probably still end up with a bye, even though that one loss against Purdue will be brutal. They'll still have beat Ohio State and Oregon and likely get one of the 4 byes in the college football playoff. So it's just that weird mix, but at the same time, Indiana football is never, last year was the first time they'd won 10 games in the season. The first time they'd won 11. This will be the chance to win 12 for the first time, but also a perfect regular season. I think you asked the boldest fans, 2 years ago, if they ever thought they would ever see, an 11-win Indiana season. Most would probably say no, much less a 12-0 regular season.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, it's going to be cold Friday night, so maybe there's going to be some jackets that cover up some cream and crimson. But I'm curious to see what the crowd is like. Obviously, Purdue starts every home game at kickoff with the IU sucks chant. I'm curious to hear what that sounds like. How much of that will be IU sucks? How much of that could potentially be Purdue sucks? I'm curious to see what the crowd looks like on a Black Friday, Thanksgiving weekend. I know there's going to be, I personally know a ton of people that are going up there from Bloomington, from Central Indiana, that are making the trip up to West Lafayette for the game. So I'm curious to see what the crowd looks like. I'm curious to see what the weather looks like. I know there's been a little bit made of the fact that, Fernando Mendoza is a Miami kid, played at Cal, hasn't necessarily probably played in a game that's going to be sub freezing and potentially snowy like it's going to be on Friday night. But I think he'll probably be fine. But I'm interested to see what the crowd looks like. I'm interested to see what the ambiance looks like, and I'm curious to see if Cincinnati aims to make another statement. Obviously, 66-0. I think Indiana scored like 35 points of those in the final 20 minutes of that game. Like Cincinnati continued to pour it on. I'm curious if he goes that route again, or if we see Fernando Mendoza pulled a little bit early, if we see the starters, the Elijah Surratts of the world, those guys maybe not play as many snaps as they typically would, knowing the Big Ten Championship, should Indiana win against Purdue, is on the horizon just over a week later.
I'm kind of I think they'll probably do what they've been doing, where we'll see Alberto Mendoza if it gets to the point where Indiana's cruising. But you mentioned the Indiana sucks chant, though, and you also mentioned the last time Indiana or Purdue won a game again, the Big Ten was, that Tom Allen last game. I'll never forget the Purdue sucks chant, and then Jalen Lucas takes the kick to the house to retake the lead and just silent Ross State Stadium. That was, one of the more electric moments we've seen from Indiana, especially in that era. But it will be it's going to be, it's Purdue. You mentioned it. Rivalry games are weird. They always find a way to be weird. We saw Michigan take down Ohio State last year when no one thought that was going to happen. And there's a reason you play it out. But Zach, let's just jump into predictions before we wrap up. Indiana 28.5-point favorites. I'll get your score prediction, and then we'll wrap.
See, it's difficult. Purdue, the old adage is if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. Purdue's going to use two quarterbacks on Friday. No Devin Mockabee. He's out for the rest of the season. His career is actually over, which he was having a great career with Purdue. Is going to break some career rushing records, but the rushing attack isn't good. The defense isn't good, and the matchup isn't good either. If you look at Purdue, and it's hard to point out a strength on the defense, first of all, it's just not a good defense. But if you were to pick one, it would be the rush defense. And their pass defense has been really bad, and that's where Indiana kind of thrives, and that's where Fernando Mendoza could go with one of those 400 passing yards, 5 touchdown type of performances. I don't think it's a shutout like last year. Let's say Purdue puts 3 points on the board. I think IU does score pretty much every time they have the ball. I'll go 56-3. IU wins.
Okay. Yeah. The run defense, it's hard. I don't want to say it's a strength, because for Purdue, it's bad, but for them, I guess it's a strength compared to their pass defense. 5 straight games of 170 rushing yards. I do think Indiana's going to be able to run all over them. I'm a little more conservative. I think we'll see, Alberto Mendoza, especially with the Big Ten Championship in a week. I think 42-6 is kind of where I've been going back and forth. I agree. I don't think that's another shutout, but I do think it's going to be Indiana comfortably in this one. That's a wrap for us, though. As always, guys, if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to The Hoosier for premium content. We got exclusive interviews, scouting reports, recruiting news, insights from the top analysts across the country covering high school recruiting. We got you covered there. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, subscribe to The Hoosier on 3 YouTube. Follow Talking About the Hoosiers on Spotify, and make sure to hit that like button. Thank you guys for tuning in once again to the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast. We'll be back.